Добрый день.
Good afternoon and welcome to the press center of the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Welcome to our regular briefing. We'll start with the schedule of the Russian Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov. March 5th, we'll see the 11th ambassadorial roundtable discussion, to which more than 100 ambassadors and representatives of international organizations accredited to Moscow are invited. Participants will speak on Ukrainian crisis, digital threats, and international information security. Traditionally, the meeting will start with the address by Minister Lavrov, who will make a presentation of the relevant Russian approaches to various aspects of international information security. He will also focus on digital threats that related to the Ukrainian crisis. We hope that this event and this recommended format will help and allow the diplomatic community to have a constructive and open dialogue on the relevant issues of international agenda, with the situation in Ukraine being one of them. So we'll make an announcement, and I would like to touch on an important historical topic. March 5th will mark the 80th anniversary of the infamous Fulton speech by Winston Churchill. I will recall that speaking with this public speech on international relations in the Westminster University in the American city of Fulton, that Prime Minister, a former Prime Minister, as a private person and without being limited to his official duties, took the liberty to make quite hardline, ideologized statements about the USSR. At the same time, this British official recognized the post-war leadership of the US and Western world, and he called the brotherly union of Anglo-speaking countries to save the world from tyranny. According to many student books on international relations and history of international relations, the Fulton speech of Winston Churchill launched the start of the bipolar confrontation, and quite often they talk about rivalry of the two military and political blocs. So looking back on the ideas of Winston Churchill that he made in Fulton, we can see that they miraculously coincide with the narratives of Western politicians of the 21st century. 80 years later, the history repeats, and we are witnessing the repeating of history, and the slogans to protect democratic and European values. The West supplies weapons to Ukrainian neo-Nazis. This NATO-centric Western coalition, call it whatever you want, sends weapons to Ukrainian neo-Nazis. This Western community, collective West, under the same pretext, they invaded Yugoslavia, Iraq, Libya, and many other states. The declassified archives of documents show that, again, let's go back to facts. In 1945 to 1946, well, maybe they were playing poker, smoking a cigar, and drinking a glass of something pleasant. Anglo-Saxon politicians were discussing secret plans of Operation Unthinkable, which was developed by the British General Staff, and Totality Operation, which was developed by Americans. These two operations viewed possible options for the aggressive war against the recent ally in the anti-Hitlerite coalition, the USSR, who took the brunt of the war against the Nazi Germany, and they discussed options to launch a nuclear strike on the Soviet territory. And information about the plans to provide nuclear weapons to Zelensky's regime is being sent by Western capitals, and that's what the statements that were made by our secret services, by our legislative bodies, and many experts spoke about it in recent days. But just look, this is ideology that goes back in history, that is 80 years long. for several months ago, we have celebrated 8 years anniversary of the great victory in the Great Patriotic War, the 8 years anniversary of the end of war in Europe. And then the Second World War ends, and we again celebrated its 8 years anniversary of its end. And we are approaching another milestone, which is the 80th anniversary of Fulton's speech, which has identified new prospects of confrontation in the second half of the 20th century and in the beginning of the 21st century. In parallel, at that time, when the whole world was happy about having the chance for the future, they've been devising the plans to attack the Soviet Union with nuclear weapons. In 1946, they've discussed to rob oil deposits of Iran, where Americans, well, it sounds quite familiar, where American and British companies blackmailed, have acquired permission with blackmail for oil production in an unrestricted way from the Iranian government. Again, it happened 80 years ago, and the situation with Iran is repeating itself today. Well, the situation changed significantly. Advantages that the Western countries gained by colonial and neo-colonial exploitation of other peoples is not enough to preserve their dominance, to which they got used to and that they don't want to lose. And they have been using other resources of other countries. Countries of the world majority speak out about their rights. They increase the economic, industrial, scientific capabilities. They strengthen their state sovereignty. All of that helps to expedite the process for the formation of a more just, multiple world order that is based on the balance of powers and interests of all states without hegemony, without dictate, and attempts to suppress competitors. By saving the world from tyranny, as it was said in the proverbial Fulton speech of Winston Churchill. Their so-called democratic concerns. And today, present day, so let's talk about the origins of the situation in Ukraine. Neo-Nazism that stems from Nazism, new anti-heroes that have appeared from other anti-heroes, nuclear weapons, peaceful use of nuclear energy that ends up in the hands of terrorists in the Kiev regime that becomes a tool of blackmailing today. February 24th, we have already published a detailed commentary about the special military operation and all its aspects. We have responded to all accusations against us. We have substantiated it with facts. You can find the text on the website of the Russian Foreign Ministry. You will find the evaluations that forced Russia to make a decision to launch the operation. I would like to touch on several aspects that justify the special military operation, and I would like to provide specific facts. For years, they've been trying to convince us that we inflate the threat of Nazism in Ukraine, that we have no right to speak about genocidal tendencies of the Kiev regime, that we are deceiving the whole world when we say that the threat of Nazism exists in Ukraine. But every day there is more and more compelling evidence that confirms the righteousness of our cause. Today we see that Nazism in the territory of the former Ukrainian SSR is not something typical for fringe groups several years ago. Today, it's the foundation of the Ukrainian state policy, which aims to create a mono-ethnic state by exterminating ethnic Russians and by erasing any mentioning of Russia. And they want to do the same way with the Hungarian minority and other minority ethnic groups. I have many times advocated for what we truly call an attempt, the Ukrainian attempts to destroy everything that is Russian, that is connected to Russia. The objective of the Zelensky regime usurped power in Kiev to turn population of its country that is taken hostage by the regime into, I would like to use the terms that is used by the office of the president. They want to turn Ukrainians into robots, into mancurts that will be submitted by the regime. You can clearly see what is happening there. They make people to be slaughtered meekly. Today it's difficult to kill them because they resisted to these attempts, but this leads to their death because they are killed on the battlefield. They are killed when they are forced in these minivans, microbuses. I even don't know how to call these cars, these vehicles, manhunting vehicles that they are using against Ukrainians. They have an objective that Kiev should reach at the order of the Western countries. They want to erase the memory about the heroic ancestors. That is what actually happens in Ukraine. The Ukrainian Institute of National Memory is responsible for the distortion of history and erasure of memory about its heroic pages of its history when Russians and Ukrainians fought together against foreign invaders and lived in a single state. We've been spoken about that body in 2025, and we substantiated our explanation with facts. And in 2025, this institute has acquired the status of a central executive body. Its size of staff was increased and financing was expanded. It is headed by the outspoken admirer of Hitler, Alexander Lavrov, who takes the liberty to make offensive and derogatory statements against the Russian people. There is no doubt what national memory this Nazi is trying to form by using the available tool set. In parallel, the Kiev regime is waging war against the largest religious denomination, which is the canonical Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which has the largest number of believers. They continue to take over churches using physical force. There are repressions against clergy and parishioners, and criminal proceedings are launched against them on false charges. There are lawsuits filed by the Ukrainian State Service of Ukraine on ethnic policy and freedom of consciousness, which bans the operation of the Kiev metropolis of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church and expropriation of property. There is another lawsuit filed by the Ukrainian Ministry of Culture on the expulsion of clergy from the Kiev Pictures Lavra. In February, the Ukrainian Ministry of Culture terminated free lease of two buildings in the lower part of Lora that was used by the canonical church. These were the premises for where the residence of the Metropolitan Onufry was located, as well as the office of Kiev Metropolis on February 17th. Again, the Ukrainian Ministry of Culture banned access of the Ukrainian clergy to two churches, the Church of the Exaltation of the Cross and Church of All Revered Fathers of Kiev Pictures Lavra, where padlocks were broken and replaced. Just look what is going on. In our countries, we have saint icons that were important for centuries for our people, and due to these circumstances, certain circumstances in the early 20th century, these icons were seized and taken away from churches, and again they were returned later, and they have taken their place, their rightful place, and those who guarded these artifacts like ministries, archives, have always carefully treated these artifacts, and they have been accepting them And these icons also were sent to churches and monasteries. And just look what is Ukraine doing. They are waging the war under the slogan of decommunization of these negative manifestations of the 20th century. All that was done by the Soviet authorities. What are they doing? They are following a horrible path when they take sacred items away from churches and monasteries. Apart from churches and history, there is another main enemy of the Kiev regime, which is the Russian language. Ukraine has enacted so many bills and laws against the Russian law. There is no other place in the world that would do that. The Russian language is banned in science, culture, education, advertisement, and services. They are doing everything, yet there is no result of their efforts because people in Ukraine continue to speak Russian. They continue to think in Russian. Well, what probably the Kiev regime could do with that? Well, probably they need to cut their heads to stop people speaking Russian and thinking in Russian. Well, they could impose more restrictions, but these restrictions do not work, have no effect. And these restrictions won't change the situation because in the history of humankind, such measures never helped such evil forces who have such misanthropic logic. According to the Ukrainian Minister of Culture, Tatiana Berezhnaya, the Ukrainian State Committee for Television and Radio Broadcasting has been working on the draft decree to remove Russian language books from circulation. Well, probably they will burn books next, and they plan to prohibit printing and distribution of Russian and Russian language literature. By commenting this initiative, a Ukrainian MP, Solomia Bobrovskaya, claimed, quote, and I quote, "As the Russian Church," says Solomia Bobrovskaya, "the Russian literature, as she says, should disappear from the Ukrainian cultural space." End of quote. I apologize. Are they going to ban works of Nikolai Gogol in Russian? Or probably they will leave him alone and will make an exception for him, or not? Or they're going to rewrite it into Ukrainian and they will speak to future generations that Nikolai Gogol has never spoken Russian. And someone will try to say that there is no Nazism in Ukraine. Well, I don't know. After the Second World War, the dehumanization and prohibition of fonts, books, languages, that's what was described as Nazism. Twisted logic of neo-Nazis who are fighting against everything Russia is unbridled. Last week, Ukrainian military officer Andrey Lankov, a neo-Nazi, stated that a war will be over once you stop speaking Russian. End of quote. And now let's think about it, how hellish this phrase sounds, because for persons who use the Russian language as a native one, they think in Russian, they read in Russian, they use it in their family, they sing in Russian, think in Russian. Well, does it mean that this person has to die according to this officer? Well, that phrase becomes even more clear because according to the Ukrainian military, the war will be over once everyone will die there. And he's echoed by Minister of Education, Oksana Lysavoy, who accused the Russian language, and can you even imagine of what? Of missile attacks, claiming that if a person doesn't make a correlation between missile attacks, said the Minister of Education, a correlation between a missile attack and the Russian language, then this person has certain problems with cause and effect relationship. End of quote. And it should be taken into account that everyone in Ukraine knows that Zelensky speaks Russian, thinks in Russian. Again, he communicates in Russian. Where is it even logical? Yes, it is logical because it's hate speech. It's misanthropic logic. Because if someone doesn't make a correlation between the start of the special military operation, rampant neo-Nazism and genocide of Russian and Ukrainians, then we have bad news for them. They have an incurable condition which is called Nazism. On February 24th, another Russophobic group made a political pilgrimage to Kiev, in particular President of the European Council, Antonio Costa, President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, and leaders of Northern European Baltic states and Croatia. Their visit was conceived as a demonstration of enduring commitment to Ukraine's just fight. They planned to substantiate that with the specific steps from Brussels, which is the adoption of the 20th package of anti-Russian sanctions and the so-called 90 billion euro military loan, which is also called by Ursula von der Leyen as the steel porcupine loan for 2026-2027, for the period of 2026-2027. And they plan to spend 2/3 of the loan on military needs of Ukraine. However, it didn't work out apart from empty picture and loud and tired slogans, and even Zelensky haven't received any clear answer to Ukraine's accession to the EU.
He was told by Ursula von der Leyen in particular that it is quite soon that they can see how Ukraine is making an effort and does everything it could and even more to join the EU, and the membership is not far away, but no one knows when. The very same day, the Kiev held a meeting of the coalition of the willing with the President of France, British Prime Minister and Chancellor of Germany joined online. It turned out to be nothing more than a riot. It becomes more clear that in the documents and statements, the participants do not speak anymore, that they believe without any doubt in the military victory of the Kiev regime. Their main task is to support the way they can the minimal military capabilities of the armed forces of Ukraine, and to make sure that the Zelensky regime lasts for some more time. The Europeans yet again showed that they really create obstacles to the settlement of the conflict. Antonio, for example, Antonio Costa said directly, I quote, Russia, as he said, cannot be permitted to make gains at the negotiation table. Oh my God, you are not even there. And no one is expecting you there. No one has invited you there because you do not know how to behave. You were there once, but you lied, you cheated and tricked, but you were caught. So stay under the table and do not say a word. But Ursula von der Leyen, though, said that the European Union, will not relent until peace is restored. Peace, she added, on the Ukraine's terms. End of quote. This frenzy or aggressive sentiment, probably together, was caught by the newly appointed defense minister of Ukraine, Mikhail Fedorov, who said that, I quote, everyday war should become a threat to the existence of Russia itself. End of quote. What kind of peace are we talking about? What Ukraine's terms are we talking about? I cannot quite grasp that. The British continue to show active interest in preserving instability in our region. They create obstacles to long-lasting and resilient settlement of the crisis. They do everything they can to prevent any kind of settlement. The then Prime Minister of Great Britain, Boris Johnson, you remember, he in April 2022 talked the Kiev words out of peace agreement, but they had very beneficial conditions back then. He, according to the Wall Street, extinguished himself with new outrageous statements. In particular, he called on the Europeans to support Kiev more actively and to build up finances to Ukraine at the expense of the Russian frozen assets. At the same time, the British Defense Minister John Healey said that he will hope to become the first defense minister who will send troops to Ukraine. They already sent troops to Ukraine without peace 8 years ago, so he won't be the first one. From the British budget will allocate 200 million pounds to establish staff on multinational forces of the coalition of the Willings with 70 people in the personnel. They want to do everything they can not to stop the war. 70 people will work, or I don't know, just be there, play games, or I don't know what they're going to do in that staff. 70 people. Despite misconception of John Healey, the deployment of British troops in Ukraine will mean not the end of the war, but protraction of conflict and higher risk of a large-scale military conflict with the participation of many more countries. As we said many times, in case of military intervention on Ukraine, the foreign contingents will become a legitimate target for us. Western experiments with the Ukrainian project led to a sad social and economic situation in the country, woes and losses for many people. Since coup d'etat in 2014, Ukraine appeared to be in a deep demographic crisis. The population in the regions under the control of the Kiev regime, in comparison with the Soviet period, has decreased by almost twofold. According to the migration bodies of Ukraine, it stood at 28.7 million people on September 1st, 2025. But this happened because of the police impunity, mass repressions against the dissent, impunity of national radicals, the use of force against civilians. As a result, there's lower birth rates. People flee in an attempt to avoid participating in the war until the last Ukrainian. And of course, they flee from the nationalist frenzy that started in the Ukraine by the supporters of the Nazi collaborator Bandera. We know that the stem of the Ukrainian nationalism after World War II was designed by the Anglo-Saxons. The relevant circumstances and facts were given in great detail in the article of the Deputy Chairman of the Council of Security of the Russian Federation, Dmitry Medvedev, published in the Rodina Journal, issue number 1, 2026. We sent several copies to the embassies of Western countries in Moscow, not only to those who directly involved in the cultivation of ideas of radical nationalism and neo-Nazism in Ukraine, but also to those who will find it useful to know the sources of this phenomena and know their Anglo-Saxon puppeteers, as well as to realize who and what they sponsor today as in finance and military support to Ukraine. I hope that after careful study of this material, they will report to their capitals. The Kiev regime is suffering losses on the far fronts. They channel their anger against civilians in Russia. They commit terror attacks, targetedly strike the populated neighborhoods, essential facilities, social, educational, and medical facilities. The Ukrainian neo-Nazis remotely mined roads close to settlements. As a result, there were several cases of civil vehicles being blown up in the last week from the actions of the armed forces of Ukraine in various Russian regions. At least 120 people were influenced, including 2 children. 14 people were killed. I'll give you only several facts. The Belgorod region. On February 17th through 21st, a drone killed 1 person, at will 5 people wounded, including a 3-year-old girl. On February 23rd, Belgrade yet again was subject to mass missile attack, including with the use of HIMARS complexes. Udmurtia, February 21st, 11 employees at a factory in Vodkinsk were wounded following a Ukrainian attack. 3 of them were taken to hospital. The LPR, on February 23rd, during a drone attack in Kremlin, a 75-year-old man was killed, 1 more person wounded. In Svatova, a 36-year-old woman was wounded. The Kherson Oblast region. On February 17th, in Loshki, following drones dropping munitions, 2 civilians were killed. 58-year-old man was killed. On February 22nd, in the village of Chulkanovka, an ambulance was blown up. The doctors were not wounded. The Zaporozhye region. On February 17th, in the city of Tokmak, following a drone attack, a 58-year-old man was killed. 2 civilians of 70 and 77-year-old were wounded. 1 civilian woman was killed following an artillery shelling of the village of Adinoe. On February the 20th, in the city of Energodar, a drone attacked and damaged the middle school number 4, where they were children. 700 people were there, but fortunately no one was wounded. Sebastopol, on February 17th, the Ukrainian drone attacked a residential neighborhood. A 9-year-old child was wounded. Kursk region, on February 17th, in the village of Kalinovka, after a drone attack, a 53-year-old man was killed. The Bryansk region, on February 18th, the drone attacked a woman and she was killed. The Russian law enforcement bodies will continue to bring to justice the Ukrainian military criminals and foreign mercenaries. The verdicts in the absentia were given to the citizen of Israel and Great Britain, Arya Ben Yehuda, and the Colombia, Dainere Predominado de Jesuso. They were given 14 years in prison. 7.5 years in prison were given to the citizen of Canada, Patrice Buranello. All of them are wanted internationally. The militants of Separate Assault Brigade 95, the Mechanized Brigade 17, and Separate Mechanized Brigade 158. Ivan Khvorstanov, Andrei Skvirko, and Roman Kurikov were charged. All these facts reconfirm the relevance of the goals to denazify and demilitarize Ukraine. All of them will be achieved. We also talked about the supplies of nuclear materials or even nuclear weapons to Ukraine. Commentary about this was published on our resources on February 24th. If you have questions about this, I will be ready to answer all of them. I would like also to speak about the following thing. On the February the 20th, on initiative of our country, an informal meeting of the UN Security Council meeting took place. It concerned the informational support, and to put it directly, distortion and lies about the Ukrainian crisis in the Western media. We wanted to talk about for several years, but finally this meeting did take place. The speakers included the Norwegian political scientist Glenn Deason and Italian journalist Andrea Lucilli. There was a true detective story for the speakers because they had to overcome a number of logistical and administrative obstacles that strangely appeared in NATO countries on their route, on their way to the event. They presented the participants of the meeting a detailed analysis how the Western media, biased Western media, shape a separate reality about the Ukrainian crisis to increase the support to ideas to continue hostilities in Ukraine and to counter Russia in general among the Western societies. Glenn Deason and Andrei Lucilli, on examples, talked about the key, most outrageous facts and narratives about unprovoked invasion of Russia to Ukraine, inadmissibility of dialogue with an aggressor. This is also something that the Western media say. And yet again, the meme, as they say, about imminent defeat of Russia on the battlefield. They also talked about the mythologized trend that Russia is about, as the Western media say, at the behest of their officials, Russia will attack or even conquer Europe. They also mentioned this fake, an outrageous fake, that is called the Zelensky's lies, continued by the Western media about the kidnapped Ukrainian children. They made it up. The informal meeting on such a relevant topic caused special interest by our partners in the countries of the global south. They see what is going on. They know what is going on. And they show more and more clearly the true immunity to anti-Russian propaganda and fakes about Russophobe narratives in the Western media. There's one more announcement. I talked about what has already taken place. And now I would like to announce one thing. An ambassador at large of the Russian MFA, Roger Miroshnik, has prepared a second special report, Violations of the International Humanitarian Law by the Kiev regime regarding treatment of prisoners of war, Secret Prisons, Part 2. Soon it will be published on our website and will be sent through our diplomatic missions to international human rights organizations. It will show the evidence of the criminal acts of the Kiev regime. The second part of this report contains key verified data about the violation of the international humanitarian law and crimes committed against Russian soldiers. Within the survey conducted by the ambassador at large, the testimonies of Russian soldiers were collected. According to this data, we can make a conclusion that there is systematic torture in the secret prisons on the territory of Ukraine. The report includes excerpts from the statements of Russian soldiers who were in the Ukrainian captivity. They confirm the mass character of abuse, torture, violence, and killings that are a commonplace in dozens of secret prisons on the territories under the control of the Kiev regime. There are beatings, threats, executions. Those are the practices of World War II. All of these are an integral element of this system of secret prisons created by the Kiev regime and kept far away from the eye of the foreign observers. I'll give you only a couple of quotes from this report, from these testimonies that are facts collected, systematized, and kept until the very moment when it is the moment of truth, and they will be punished for this. Quote 1. I've been beaten since 11 a.m. until 3-4 p.m. I continue the quote. I was set on fire. I almost lost my leg. I was tied up to a tree upside down and beaten with bats. They didn't ask anything, simply beat me. There's one more quote. Every time when we changed the cars, we were beaten up. They had plastic tubes, you know? They constantly hit our heads, nails, arms with them, constantly. There's one more quote. They told me, call your wife. We'll tell you all the necessary addresses and locations. They wanted her to set on fire a recruitment office or a car of an officer. Believe me, these are the mildest quotes from the testimonies of our prisoners of war who went through the hell titled Ukrainian secret prisons. Find strength to read it. The whole world is following the fate of a monkey in a Japanese zoo, and one woman went on and on about this monkey and couldn't see that it suffered.
Well, there are living people, men, women. There are many children who are suffering today, who are suffering right now, who are suffering for years from tortures, from inhumane, cruel tortures. Well, probably we should find forces within ourselves, and instead of watching at the situation in the Japanese zoo, we should probably look at what is really happening in Ukraine, to look at the secret prisons and the territories not far from Russia that are being organized by the Kiev regime. For years, they have been convincing us of friendship, love, and cooperation. It is difficult to watch this and read these testimonies. To be honest, I cannot watch it myself. At some moment, I start realizing that there is a limit to it. But I continue watching and I continue reading. And I advise you to do the same. You need to know about it, because this is the current reality we live in today. There is another moment, quite important one. I see that tens of thousands of people today are compassionate with the monkey in a Japanese zoo, but there are thousands of people who need our compassion, probably we should become the one who should show compassion to thousands of people who are going through hell, who are being beaten, who are being detonated and tortured. If you want to cry, if you want to be compassionate with someone, just read the report by Rodion Miroshnik. Just read the materials by Maxim Grigoriev. Just read them. They exist in every format. There is a printed version, there is a digital version of these materials. They have links to photos and videos. Just read out, just leave anything beside. I'm telling to those who don't need to pass an exam, who don't have any urgent tasks, just leave your fiction books aside. Make a pause in watching your favorite TV series. Just read the report written by Rodion Miroshnik, the Russian ambassador at large. Watch the materials made by the public tribunal led by Maxim Grigoriev. You must do that because it is happening now, today, nowadays. Well, it happens sometime later probably, but it will become a foundation for the future works and fiction books and feature films. These are what people going through. They return to Russia, and that's what they talk about. They survived, and they plainly talk about what is happening there and what they went through. The Kiev regime has created and continues to operate a network of prisons where the Third Geneva Convention is totally ignored, and tortures and torment have become absolutely normal. And who is sponsoring all that? Those who have created floating CIA prisons. Those are giving money to the Kiev regime. You can read WikiLeaks materials that were published by Julian Assange, who again was tortured by Western secret services in many ways. He knew what he was doing, but he was still carrying out investigations. Those who teach the Kiev regime to treat prisoners of war like that, they treated people in the same way earlier. Again, I implore you, I urge you to read the materials. I think that foreign diplomats accredited to the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs will be interested to get first-hand information to report to their capitals about the truth that they were eagerly ignoring for years. Because their children and grandchildren of these diplomats will ask them, father, mother, grandfather, grandmother, you worked in Moscow in that period of time. What can you tell me about what they were doing with Russians and Russian citizens, so that they wouldn't be in shame? They wouldn't have to shamefully look into the eyes of their children and grandchildren. I'm speaking to Western diplomats. Read these reports and don't tell me that you have no access to information. Probably you have no desire, but you have information, because these are two different things. And let's look at the situation in energy, because we have received so many questions about Ukraine halting oil deliveries to Hungary and Slovakia through Druzhba pipeline. Well, what assessment could we have? Because These actions put energy security at risk of these countries and the European continent at large, and this action of the Kiev regime has caused justified indignation of Hungarian and Slovak authorities, who have described such actions by the Kiev regime as a direct encroachment on their sovereignty. We are not surprised by the lack of the proper response of European institutions who are guarding interests of their citizens. Well, no one is surprised by these attacks because these are routine attacks. No one is going to condemn them, especially Brussels structures, because who funds them? Brussels funds them, and at their money, the Kiev regime strikes the energy infrastructure. The European Commission withdraws from criticizing the actions of the Kiev regime as it was with Nord Stream, and they cynically turn a blind eye to the risks of uninterrupted energy supplies to the European Union. They openly demonstrate that difficulties with energy supplies experienced by certain EU countries are not a problem for the EU if these countries follow wrong policy. That's the European solidarity. And more news for you, quite a fantastic story, but I don't know. What cannot we qualify something as not fantastic? Because can we even imagine tortures that are taking place on the European continent? Because this is rampant in Europe today. There was a show-up event, pretentious event organized on February 23rd in the Colosseum Film Theater in Berlin, which was conspicuously named as Café Kiev, and German Chancellor Merz quoted for the second time a French writer and Russophobe of the 19th century, Astolphe de Custine. And when Friedrich Merz quoted Astolphe de Custine, he stated that Russia is currently in a state of profound barbarism. We know that German authorities have difficulties with education and logic, but please don't remind about it to us. It is well known that bad-looking legs should be hidden under a skirt, and if you have bad knowledge and, well, bad brains, you have to hide them under a hat, which you probably put even on your eyes. Well, by doing so, the German Chancellor has once again demonstrated his absolute ignorance and demonstrated whom he sees as his political idol. I would like to recall Friedrich Merz that by barbarians, Romans referred to Germanic tribes. Well, that's quite evident to us. We know about it. Probably he forgot about it. He referred to Germanic tribes who were engaged in robbery, who Romans believed to be savage and uncultured. And these barbarians destroyed the city of Rome. They started with Rome. They continued with the fire of the Inquisition, genocide of indigenous people in Namibia. Then it turned gradually into the Holocaust and crematorium ovens in Auschwitz, in Buchenwald. And Germany today, with its belligerent Russophobia that is instilled into all groups of population, misappropriation of others' property, from oil refineries to watches and female accessories, and the German customs is a questionable example of civilization. So when we use barbarism, you shouldn't use it with regard to Russia. Barbarism is about you, Friedrich Merz. As for Marquis de Custine, the so-called philosopher has wrote so many nasty bogus stories about Russia that it has become that are quite typical for representatives of the colonizing country. And I'm quite sure that Merz doesn't know about it. I'm quite sure that his advisors and his aides has no understanding of the fact that 100 years after the publication of this work by the French writer, the so-called writer, this book inspired, guess whom? Well, it's quite understandable that this book inspired Merz, but before that, just be ready for that, embrace it, brace for it. This book inspired Joseph Goebbels. He personally ordered to reissue this book by Astolfo Duquesne. Well, German diplomats, I'm not asking if you feel shame, if you feel shameful. I have another question for you. How are you living with this when your German foreign ministers and don't know that Greenland isn't a part of the European Union for many years because Greenland withdrew from it, and now your chancellors are quoting those who inspired Joseph Goebbels? That's quite a horrible story, especially for the Germans themselves. Another story, another example, another situation. But yet we have this spirit, this meager spirit, you know. February 13th, the Minister of Defense of Finland, Antti Häkkänen, announced about Helsinki's intent to revisit the question of property deals that were signed with foreigners over the past 20 years. No, you are not mistaken. This is the Minister of Defense of Finland who stated that we need to reconsider property deals. Well, they want to use these measures with regard to citizens of countries that are not part of the EU and Eurasian Economic Zone. It's quite clear that these measures will target Russian citizens. I recall that the Finnish authorities for quite a long time been trying to put under their control the process of acquiring property by Russians. In particular, the initial steps were taken in 2019 to toughen up rules in this area, and another cycle of restrictions followed in 2022 against the backdrop of the unbridled Russophobic hysteria that emerged after the start of the special military operations, and it all ended in 2025 under the pretext of protecting their national security. Finland has imposed a total ban on property deals, and by the way, the government of Finland has officially declared that this restriction is imposed on citizens of Russia and Belarus. By doing so, this plan of the Finnish Minister of Defense is a continuation of a series of groundless discriminatory steps. It shows that the official Helsinki, with is infected with the fires of Russophobia, will not stop at anything in the fight against the imagined Russian threat, and they are ready to openly trample on fundamental legal principles and rights, including the right to property. I'm not even talking about segregation of people on national ground. They do not even think about the fact that it is forbidden to do so. And soon they have decided to impose a ban on property deals, and the Minister of Finland has announced such measures. But probably the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Finland would send numerous documents to the Ministry of Defense that were signed by Finland about its commitments that they assumed in OSCE, because they truly need to read these documents and ask themselves questions if they're still committed to what they subscribed to in the OSCE, or they are no longer guided by these documents. They need to decide. Because this story once again reveals the hypocrisy of our Western partners, as we called them earlier, because they try to pose themselves as a stronghold of democracy, of civilization, I don't know how to call it, a volcano probably, of freedoms. But in reality, they encroach on fundamental rights and freedoms. Moving further, situation in Moldova. Moldovan authorities continue to make attempts to ban Russia and CIS in Moldova. It is clear that they're doing that to justify their management mistakes in the eyes of Western sponsors and to push the stalled process of Euro integration forward. On February 24, the Moldovan Ministry of Culture has sent out a circular letter to public cultural institutions and companies working in show business. This letter recommends to notify in advance about the intent to invite artists, foreign artists, especially from the CIS countries, in plays, concerts, festivals, and other cultural and artistic events. What's next? Probably we need to provide them a form about our skull, DNA test, something else. Moldovan public figures indicate that the clause, especially from CIS states, clearly means from Russia. The initiative aims to complicate the arrival of Russian performers to Moldova. Well, Moldovan authorities cannot stay calm due to the fact that Russian performers are increasingly popular among Moldovans than European shows that are being imposed on them.
The list go on. The Foreign Minister of Moldova, Popshoi, compared the CIS with a suitcase without a handle. Remember in which in his opinion is not useful anymore. In this context, the Foreign Ministry of Moldova had better have a suitcase without a handle than a handle without a suitcase, which is your case. We hear more commentaries from pro-governmental proponents that Moldova ostensibly won't lose anything from the withdrawal from the Commonwealth. The process will be painless at the expense of developing bilateral relations with the member states. It's difficult to believe, though. The artificial break-off of solid historical economic ties with the partners on the Eurasian space make the economy of Moldova suffer. The authorities bet on the fact that the loss of the CIS market will be compensated by the profits from the export to the EU. Proves itself to be ineffective. Everyone understands that. No, Europe needs these products, not because these products are poor, but because, first of all, they have their own producers. They are also limited by the relevant restrictions by the European Commission. They are also in deep crisis. They have to come up with something to keep themselves afloat. Not how to open the doors to the goods from Moldova. Everyone understands that, and Sandor understands that too. But she does everything she can to trick people in Moldova. The economy of Moldova is slowing down. Let's look at the figures. The external debt of Moldova reached record high $11.6 billion. The deficit of accounts payable is about $1 billion. The poverty levels exceeds 30%. People with low income is 75%. We are very sad because of that. So the Santos regime should see something as a reason for this. They cannot constantly come up with the idea that performers who come from the CIS countries hit the economy of Moldova so that 65% of people have low income. They have to see the truth and say it out loud. In Moldova itself, experts say that this term can be applied to the Moldovan authorities themselves. Only there's a difference. If we're talking about the Moldovan authorities, the suitcase is empty for a long time. The EU finds it more and more difficult to support them. The multi-million means allocated go away. We talked about a lot of double standards among the Western sponsors of Moldova. They turn a blind eye on repressions against the government of Gagauzia, Evgenia Gutsul. In August 2025, think about it, in August 2025, she was given 7 years in prison. But why? What for? On what grounds? This is the youngest woman, a mother, a public figure, an active citizen. She believed the fairy tales of the leadership of Moldova about democracy, that they should just fight for their rights more actively, to strive for implementation of those things that are needed, that it is needed to represent their nation and to take the political route in this, to fight for the things of principle for people. It's only for this, for believing these things, for the fact that she took the political route to defend the rights of her people, she was given to prison for 7 years. There's one more example. I mean the Dniester region. People there at the parliamentary elections in September 2025 were de facto stripped of the possibility to participate in the voting and live for many years in a severe blockade by Chisinau and Kiev. On top of that, there's one more fact. On February 18th, the Bureau on Democratic Institutions and Human Rights of the OSCE published a final report about overseeing the parliamentary elections in Moldova that took place on September 28, 2025. It states a lot the non-existent Russian interference. These facts are presented, and the facts of the violation of the legislation by the Moldovan authorities are presented as separate cases that did not really influence the situation. However, even the Bureau, known for its double standards, could not turn a blind eye on that. They wrote about outrageous facts about abolishment of registration of 2 political parties right before the elections and many other things. Look what interesting game the Western started to play. These reports of the Bureau are published after the elections are recognized, despite severe violations. They're recognized legitimate and real by the Westerners when the results are implemented, when the government, the fractions start to work. Afterwards, 2 to 5 years after that, a report of the Bureau is published. It contains facts, but no one cares about this anymore. What is the target audience for this? It is a thing of the past. This is a very interesting game. This confirms the evaluations of independent political scientists that these were the most non-democratic in the history of Moldova. They were there were a lot of violations, shenanigans, and the voting in the North America and Western Europe were not transparent. That's how Moldova lives, and Sandu and her Western sponsors do everything possible so that people forget about Russia, about the CIS, about their history in general. I am absolutely sure these efforts are futile. People in Moldova understand that the economic problems to do with the artificial break-off with Russia and other CIS countries, the statements of Russian, the performances of Russian performers in Moldova are very popular, despite the circular notes of the Cultural Ministry of Moldova. We also had a lot of questions about relations between Russia and Iran. We see continued threats against Tehran, the sub-rattling, and the irresponsible building up of regional tensions by Washington. Russia and Iran continue to gradually strengthen mutually beneficial cooperation for the interests of both countries. On February 16th through 18th, the Iranian capital held a regular 19th session of the permanent Russia-Iran Commission on Trade and Economic Cooperation. It was participated by numerous representatives of a lot of interested Russian ministries and agencies, state and major private companies. They discussed joint infrastructural projects in energy and transport, including the construction of Resht-Astara railway. Following the session, a number of important documents were signed. The high level of our relations is shown in the fact that Energy Minister Sergey was received by the President of Iran. There were also substantial negotiations with the chairman of Supreme National Security Council of Iran. An important event was the opening of the first Russian cultural center in Iran. The ceremony was participated by Sergey Tsivilov, ambassador of Russia, Alexei Dedov, the head of Rossoturnchество, Yevgeny Primakov, and other members of the commission. These events in Tehran yet again showed that Russia stands next to our Iranian friends in this period, very difficult for them. We'll continue develop our strategic partnership between our countries. We also received a lot of questions about the so-called inauguration session of the Board of Peace on Gaza. We have prepared a comprehensive response. As you know, indeed, on February 19th, Washington held inauguration session of the Board of Peace on Gaza. We saw that during this event there was a decision to provide $17 billion for the Board of Peace. At the same time, $7 billion were promised by Azerbaijan, Bahrain, Kazakhstan, Qatar, Kuwait, Morocco, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Uzbekistan. This money will be used to rebuild the Gaza Strip. We also would like to remind you that we are prepared to allocate $1 billion for the Board of Peace. from the assets frozen in the U.S. under the previous administration that belonged to the Russian Federation. We did not receive a response yet. Besides, there's information about preliminary agreements about forming international stabilization forces to be deployed in Gaza Strip. A number of countries, including Albania, Indonesia, Kazakhstan, Morocco, and the so-called authorities of Kosovo, wanted to send their soldiers there, with a total number of 20,000 people. Egypt and Jordan will be training the Palestinian policemen for Gaza. We will follow closely the implementation of these plans. According to the UN Security Council Resolution 2803, the President, the Board of Peace should provide the UN Council of Security written reports about their work every 6 months. A couple of words about the residual mechanism for criminal tribunals. In December 2025, we demanded the structure to be prepared to complete their activities and by the next review of their work in June this year. This structure that continue to be in charge of the issues left after the completion of the mandate of the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia and for Rwanda lasted too long. The mechanism inherited anti-Serb bias and double standards from ICTY. It cannot effectively fulfill their duties. The only case that they have about Rwanda is the case of Felicien Kabuye, and it was brought to halt indefinitely due to his health condition. The current activities of the mechanism show that they want to find bureaucratic options to prolong their existence. Their last report about its activities does not include certain measures and deadlines of the completion of their activities. On the contrary, they stress the long-standing character of their duties, first of all, in observing the verdict's execution until 2040. The budget has been reduced by only $1.3 million. The annual budget is almost $61 million. The number of people has been reduced by only one person and has now 233 people. The reports of the UN General Secretary also failed to notion the real completion of the mechanism. We would like to underline the formal and ineffective approach of the mechanism to overseeing the verdict's execution. They systematically ignore humanitarian grounds for parole and the practice of its president, Garcia Legati Santana, to make a decision about parole of the prisoners only in cases when they want to avoid responsibility for their death is unacceptable and inhuman. We would like to stress that archives of the mechanism should be given as they are to those states interested or to the UN Secretariat. We insist that they are accessible for a wider public. Russia has long stopped providing funds for the residual mechanism. The memorandum signed on January the 7th by President Donald Trump also provides for the withdrawal from it. We call on other countries to stop financing this structure. About Japan, we received new information about military crimes of the militarist Japan during World War II. We said many times that these crimes has no statute of limitation and are investigated up to now. The General Prosecutor's Office of the Russian Federation in 2025 officially notified that they overthrown the previous verdicts to rehabilitate certain Japanese citizens. The list of their names will be provided in the text of the briefing. During the war and after Japan's capitulation in 1945, they participated in subversion and spying activities against the Soviet Union. We said that the court decision ruled that they are proven guilty and cannot be rehabilitated. On February the 18th, after the impeachment of the president of Peru, José Sergey, in line with the Constitution of the Republic, the head of state is the president of Congress of Peru, José María Balcázar Solana. He will head the country until the transition of the power to the new government in July this year, following the general elections. The Republic of Peru is one of the long-standing partners of Russia in Latin America and the Asia-Pacific region. The diplomatic relations between our countries goes back. We are prepared to further develop our relations free of geopolitical situation and foreign influence on our bilateral relations. This change of power is internal affair of this country. We wish the new head of this friendly state success while fulfilling his duties in resolving important goals in national development. In Bangkok, the Russian seasons will be opened at the Thailand Cultural Center. This large-scale project from February through November this year in Bangkok and Phuket will see the performances of the best Russian creative companies, including the Zikina State Academic Russian Folk Ensemble, Eifman Academic Ballet Theatre, Moiseev State Folk Dance Ensemble. The Russian seasons take place in the format of a multi-genre festival of culture. Besides concerts and theater productions, we plan to have film screenings, workshops, lectures, etc. The inauguration will be attended by the Culture Minister of Russia. The program will include the concert of Denis Matsuev with the program from classics to jazz with the participation of Royal Bangkok Symphonic Orchestra. The Russian season in Thailand shows the dynamic development of Russia-Thailand ties and the growing interest to traditions and culture of our country there.
And now about traditions and culture of our country that are celebrated in our country. Quite often we're talking about our traditional values. And in our founding documents and the policy documents of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, traditional values have become a priority. They are used as a guideline in the work of our ministerial departments. And when we're talking with different countries, with the audience of friendly and non-friendly countries, and with representatives of various countries, they ask us questions: what are the Russian traditions? What are the Russian values? What do you mean by traditional values when you talk about them? Well, we provide examples and explanations, but I think that there are events that speak for themselves without even saying a word and demonstrate traditional values in their entire beauty. I'm talking about the folk craft exhibition Ladya, which tells a lot. On the eve of the International Women's Day from March 4th to 8th, 2026, the Gostiny Dvor will host an exhibition of folk and art crafts, Ladya, Spring Fantasy 2026. It is expected that it will be attended by more than 700 organizations, individual craftsmen, artists, and creative associations of Russian regions. Throughout 23 years of its existence, Ladia project has become a major event that represents folk crafts of Russia. It is organized by the Ministry of Industry and Commerce of Russia, Commerce and Trade Chamber of Russia, regional executive bodies, and my business center of support for small and medium enterprises. Its main goal is mutual enrichment of cultures, harmonization of inter-ethnic ties, strengthening friendly ties between Russian peoples, spiritual, moral, and patriotic upbringing of Russian citizens, popularization of folk crafts. So all these crafts and made by Russian peoples, it has come through centuries and millennia. As part of this project, more than 100 master classes for groups of children and adults are provided free of charge, as well as more than 300 individual showings and visits of artistic crafts and arts in the city of craftsmen that are given by eminent craftsmen artists, and guests will see how these items and crafts are being created and also to test their skills. It is expected that a wide concert program is expected. There are more than 100 performances by professional artists, folk bands from entire Russia, including children's and inclusive ones, and showings of collections of accessories and clothes. This exhibition is an authentic present for the International Women's Day, which is a celebration of spring, beauty, and traditional values. And I'm going to talk about this holiday in greater detail next week. It's quite interesting again, and it's indicates and demonstrates what we're talking about. These traditional values are not made up. These are true traditional values that we cherish. And I think that every visitor will find diversity of forms and images, that they will have an opportunity to take part in some master classes, to find something interesting to them. We invite representatives of the diplomatic corps so that they could see for themselves the grandeur and diversity of our culture. The diplomatic corps visits such exhibitions. They organize it visit it in an organized way through Glava PDK or through our ministry, or they pay individual visits. But since diplomats regularly visit our country and they work in our country on a rotational basis, I think that this information is quite useful for those who are going to visit the exhibition for the first time. You will find a web link to this exhibition in the text version of the briefing. I'm ready to answer your questions. International Life, please. Hello, Ms. Zakharova. Hello. Several days ago, Telegraph, citing unknown officials from the European intelligence, wrote that Europe is concerned that Russian representatives have property that is located in the vicinity of military and civilian facilities in Europe, and that's why they are afraid that these facilities may be used as Trojan horses, that may be used for observation, diversion, and secret attacks. What is your response to that publication? These are classic fake news. This is classic fake news that Moscow is allegedly using its property to address some intelligence or other hostile objectives, Well, it's yet another attempt to incite hatred towards Russian and to Russophobia, to manipulate with a sense of fear in the population of their own countries. That's what they are doing with the population of the northern and southern Europe, and they are doing that systemically, and it is carried out by the political elites of these countries. Portraying our country as an enemy has become an essential part of the domestic policy of a number of EU countries. With the western part of Europe, let's say it like that, the information potential of the Russian threat is being spinned to distract the attention of regular Europeans from their own profound social and economic issues. This Russophobia is used in order to fight against their own political opponents. There are many examples of that. They also use that to fight against the dissenters, to amplify tolerance to the restrictions of rights and freedoms. It also is used as one of the tools to stay in power. By doing so, they are trying, and I think everyone understands that they are trying to justify the need for providing high amount of military, political, and economic support to Kiev, the need to pursue militarization of the European Union. It has no real ground to do that, no real reason, but yet they are doing that and they make up this fake news. How else can I explain increased military spending for which future generations of Europeans will have to pay? Moreover, many Western leaders have invested their entire political capital into fueling anti-Russian spiral, and there is no opportunity to go back. They have just made their bets on that. Well, they have made a bet on 21, but they are playing 22. Well, there are clear results of intimidating their own population. The recent opinion polls that were carried out by Eurobarometer in February, more than 2/3 of Europeans believe that their country are under a threat. 74% support the current level of investment in defense, and they even believe that the military expenditure should be even increased. Well, they believed in Bucha and what happened there without even thinking where is the list of names, and I apologize, where are the memorials, tombstones, where are burial sites of these people, where are the dates of birth, where are their photos, where are their family members? No one asked any question about that, and they have just bought an entire fake story. So we have seen no point to behave like other states who punish their citizens for their ethnicity, their nationality, or their religion. We do not to be like them, like these states. You know that we have been providing an answer in spheres in such a way that it would comply with our national interests. Nationalism has nothing to do with our national interests. As you know, nationalism is their illness, not ours. Thank you. Tass, please. Hello, Ms. Zakharova. Tass agency, we have one question for you. what is your commentary of the Foreign Ministry of Azerbaijan, Ceyhun Bayramov, that Russia should observe its commitments due to the air crash of Azal aircraft of December 25th, 2024, including by provide legal assessments and to pay compensations? I would like to recall that Russian and Azerbaijani leaders have discussed in detail the issue of air crash during their meeting on October 9th, 2025. In Dushanbe, the Russian side has provided its explanations, and we have been working to fulfill all the reached agreements about which we regularly inform our Azerbaijani partners through diplomatic channels and between our governments. We regularly answer questions of mass media, and we have been always doing that in a respectful way. And we have always provided detailed information on December 9, 2025 in Baku at the consultations at the level of deputy foreign ministers, as well as during our meetings with the ambassador of Azerbaijan to Moscow on December 29, 2025 and February 12, 2026. We have reached a mutual understanding with Azerbaijan about the fact that bilateral high-level contacts on this issue will be resumed in the near future, and we are ready to turn this tragic page in the bilateral relations. And I would use that phrase, but there is one thing that should be taken into account. It doesn't mean that this tragedy will be forgotten or that we have turned the page and we have left the book aside and we no longer remember about the tragedy. We intend to turn the tragic page in our bilateral relations, but yet we will preserve the memory about the tragic events and about people who died as the result of the tragedy, and there should be no doubts about that. I'm emphasizing that. I know that because I know that there are someone who doesn't like normalization between Russia and Azerbaijan, and they will manipulate their words. We will always remember about the tragedy, and we will cherish the memory about the victims. Thank you. I'm not over. Wait, I'm not over. We would like to draw the attention of the Azerbaijani partners the need to release and to return Russian citizens who were arrested on June 30th and July 1st, 2025 in Baku. We believe that it is important to improve the information background that exists around Russia-Azerbaijan relations, and it will contribute to the productive dialogue between our countries. Now I'm finished. Thank you. Ria Novosti, please. Yes, Ms. Zakharova. We have two questions for you, if you allow. Yes, please. The first question, Britain has expanded sanctions against Russia, and 240 companies and dozens of vessels were sanctioned. Experts believe that this is the largest British sanctions against Moscow since the start of the special military operation. In your opinion, what is the reason of such action? The scale of anti-Russian sanctions and hysterical statements of official authorities that are full of lies and insulting statements against our country demonstrate once again that this maniac Russophobia and they have a desire to destroy the relations with our country and to stifle our economy. That was the main goal of the British government. The British political establishment have repeatedly declared the goal to stifle the Russian economy, and they say that they won't stay calm until this goal is achieved. But they didn't provide in detail of what they're going to do next. But they have been repeating that aggressive mantra because the British political establishment has actually launched undeclared sanctions war against our people. It's a hybrid war that is launched against our country. They call on their own population to put up and to stay tolerant until, for the sake of preserving freedom and democracy in Europe. They are not stopped by the fact that it will harm themselves and their own economy. They do not want to address their own just issues. They are challenges. Like Epstein files have shown what happens in the corridors of the royal family. We have repeatedly identified these tendencies and the harmfulness of sanctions, these sanctions have nothing to do with upholding democracy, that they go against the principles that Great Britain upholds and international platforms. These are not just restrictive measures. This is a real sanctions war, and UK itself will face with the significant losses of their own economy. Right now, Great Britain is dealing with the decreased quality of living, living standards. Inflation is growing. There are other negative social and economic phenomena like waning and destroying infrastructure, growing taxes on population and businesses. London continues to deny the obvious harm of their sanctions measures that demonstrates the unscrupulousness and blatant hypocrisy of the British political elites. We know what they have been doing if we look at the Epstein files. And it became clear looking at these actions and measures, especially ones you asked about, they have used sanctions as an appeal to every ill. They have been using sanctions as a systemic matrix that they will use everywhere, anytime. And they will use it to justify their miscalculations and mistakes. And it's clear that their objectives to undermine the Russian economy won't be achieved.
Every package of sanctions will be seen as a gesture of London that can't find strength to recognize that it was not even right, but that it was erroneous, that it miscalculated everything, that it bet on the wrong horse. But they clearly are afraid that this will influence their internal ratings, and they continue to trick their people. All responsible members of the international community are shown that the British authorities want to disregard international law. And it is a good thing because that shows them in their true colors. They could hide that, but with their manners, but probably they cannot go on doing that. And this appeared in trade and investment sphere as well. What did we talk about? Their ability to negotiate, their reliability, honesty. They followed international law and their own trade laws. There's nothing anymore of it. We see a lot of stealing in Great Britain. They started to talk that they needed to have Russian assets, and they called on everyone else to do the same. In the nearest future, this sanction policy of London towards the sanctions wars will highly likely, and this is a very favorite phrase in Great Britain, will continue it will harm the interest of the British population. We believe that with the political sobering of current British elites, London will go back to a responsible behavior, including in the economic sphere. They will have to recognize their mistakes and rectify them. Do you have any more questions? Yes, I would like to ask one more question. At the last briefing on February 18th, you cited the media reports about the possible joining of Japan to NATO mechanism to procure military equipment for the Kiev regime. And recently, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan de facto confirmed that. He cited this step with the Ukrainian conflict influencing the security of the Asia-Pacific region, saying that Ukraine today is probably Eastern Asia tomorrow, end of quote. He also cited that it is necessary to react to such conflicts in any part of the world in solidarity with allies and like-minded states. What can you say about that? We said many times, and we were supported by the global majority, that to settle the Ukrainian crisis, we have to remove its root causes and not to go on with pumping Kiev with new armaments, thus protracting the conflict. In this regard, the aspiration of Tokyo to connect the situation in Ukraine with security in Eastern Asia is not only logical, but it is also a provocation. Well, weapons can end up in Eastern Asia, but you shouldn't have supplied Ukraine with these armaments in the first place. Military illegal actions in this region can occur. Let us remember the African continent, for example. The Ukrainian soldiers participated on some actions in Africa on the side of terrorists. The imposing universal standards by the West to settle all kinds of problems can only exacerbate the situation. If Japan indeed wants to settle the Ukrainian conflict and not to fuel it, they should support the real efforts of other countries to reach peace. They also should use all the possibilities to send a clear signal to Zelensky regime that he needs to be sensible and pursue a constructive approach. They can send a message to Zelensky that terror attacks against civilians are not acceptable for Tokyo. They could take such a step. It would be a step in the right direction. Thank you very much. Is Izvestia with us? Yes, good afternoon, Madam Zakharova, Zarina Rachmanova, Izvestia. What can you say about the High Representative for Diplomacy, International Affairs, Kaja Kallas, about limiting the number of employees of the permanent mission of Russia to the EU. I can confirm that the European Foreign Service notified about this decision. To reduce the number of employees to 40 people, including diplomats and technical employees. We see this measure as discrimination. This is a direct violation of Article 7 of the Vienna Declaration about Diplomatic Relations. According to this document, the accrediting state, Russia in this case, can freely appoint the personnel of their mission. The Article 25 also obligates the host side to not to make obstacles to the activities of the diplomatic missions. This is one more step in this in the destructive and suicidal direction. These actions won't go unanswered. Kallas say that it is her own achievement, and she decided that. And she cited the unwillingness to tolerate abuse of diplomatic authority. Probably you can ask Brussels about this. What does this mean? What kind of abuse they mean? Yet another attack against our diplomatic presence on the territory of EU is very telling. Brussels do not have space for diplomacy, not in relations with our country, neither in the context of the Ukrainian settlement. They bet on sanctions, force, Putin pressure, and blackmail. The EU wants to have a place at the negotiation table about Ukraine, but this is an ungrounded claim. And this is exactly the response to this action, not only of the EU to Kaja Kallas. Probably they will find it very pleasurable. Please, Sputnik Belarus, are you with us? Good afternoon. Today, the High Council of the Union States of Russia and Belarus takes place today. They discuss security, given the reports that nuclear weapons can be given to the Kiev regime. What can you say about this? Given the serious geopolitical situation, our countries have to pay serious attention to security and defense of the Union State. We have close partnership cooperation between the Council, Security Councils, defense ministries, and special services of the countries. Our foreign ministries also closely coordinate our approaches. Our joint analysis of the situation and security of the Union State takes place within the meetings of interagency delegations led by foreign ministers of the countries. Alexander Grushko and Igor Secretary, they were appointed as special representatives of Russia and Belarus to review the Treaty on Security Guarantees within the Union States. The first such meeting took place in September 2025 in Moscow. The second is scheduled in March in Minsk. This issue will be included in the agenda. Regarding today's meeting, it is taking place or Probably it has already taken place behind closed doors. I believe that all the countries will follow up. Probably they are already given. As far as I know, this issue was not planned to be discussed, but let's wait for the results. However, this is widely covered, including by your colleagues as well. State Secretary of the Union State, Sergey Glaziev, usually shares all the necessary information regarding this. Thank you. Is the Chinese media group with us? Good afternoon. Good afternoon. We have one question today. Foreign Minister of China Wang Yi underlined the necessity to respect the golden rule not to interfere into internal affairs amid deepening differences between the West and the global South. In your opinion, what's the practical significance of this statement? The approaches of our countries are coincide in principle, including regarding the key principles of the UN Charter, not to interfere in internal affairs of states and peaceful settlement of international disputes. It is important that Russia and China are committed to their international obligations and always believe that rights and freedoms of people and states should be respected. At the same time, we constantly underline that to ensure rights and freedoms is only possible through respecting international law. Unfortunately, in the last decades, we see the following. The Westerners violate the provisions that they believe to be a tool in influencing others. They do not fulfill their duties. Epstein files only show that even more vividly. They show how the elites and high leadership, including the US and the international tribunals and international organizations, demanded responsibility for other countries, and at the same time they did such horrible things that are outlawed in all the countries. The Western community at the same time found provocational narratives and promoted in the space of other independent states provocational movements or projects so that provoke under somebody else's flag human rights issues in order to afterwards blame the authorities in the country in violating international law. To a large extent, that was the Western approach in the Western countries. At all relevant platforms, we say that it is unacceptable to instrumentalize the human rights and to use them to interfere in internal affairs of sovereign states. That's just what I said, but in more official terms. In the joint statement following Russia-China summit in May 2025 in Moscow, the sides expressed the necessity to counter politicization of human rights. We think that the aspiration of the collective West to monopolize international human rights platforms are harmful. That's what they have been doing. They manipulated and performed mass killings in third countries. They speculated in the economy. That led to lower living standards in other countries. This, to a large extent, caused their narratives in human rights sphere. They have nothing to do with human rights, like manipulations with genders, etc. It is not up to them to claim the leading role in monitoring or verificating their human rights track record of other countries. We are convinced that the policy in human rights should be designed with the inclusively, with the considering the opinion of all interested states and respect international law. Is Rachel with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. We have two questions today. The first one about the plans of European Commission to permanently ban the import of Russian oil at the legislative level. It would be effective even after the sanctions of the EU against Russia are lifted. You know, the digitalization, the AI implementation demand huge resources, energy resources. Fuel, energy, yet again go to the far front, and it's a much larger scale. All this will require more powerful and regular stage of energy resources development. And we see this at the example of the actions of the U.S. They constantly think about ensuring energy resources for them through all means available to them.
We see how Asian countries are behaving and acting. They have ensured their resource base, but in contrast with the United States, they are doing that in a legal way, and they're using their economic interests. But the European Union wants to ban itself to buy oil from a reliable supplier. They don't want to buy our oil on good and favorable terms. I think that that's what a crazy man would do. Well, let's talk about the EU in detail. Let's go back into history. In May 2025, the European Commission represented a roadmap to phase out Russian energy imports, including oil. And as a follow-up, they have agreed on an EU declaration on total suspension of Russian imports no later than November 2027 that demands from EU countries continuing procurements of Russian oil, including Hungary and Slovakia, to present their national plans until May 1st, 2026 to diversify their energy imports. So that's a technological race in a new digital era, in a new digital period of time. And at that period of time, the European Commission wants to close opportunities for itself to acquire energy sources. and they want to be completely dependent on American oil supplies. They want to be dependent on one supplier. Usually, companies, countries are trying to have an advantage, competitive advantages, to ensure their safety and stability. And in a situation where the European Commission needs resources for technological race, they, in the contrary, get rid of their own competitive advantages that they earlier had. The European Commission have once again confirmed their intent to submit legislative proposals on the ban of Russian oil supplies for the EU. They are making a bet to agree on this ban by qualified majority by passing positions of their allies and members, Hungary and Slovakia, that are still interested in Russian oil imports. Because as leaders of those countries explained, Viktor Orban was talking about this. These are the people, these are the leaders who still have a high-level expertise that is confirmed by time, is confirmed later. They are not guided by pragmatic approach. They have utopistic but rather anti-utopistic attitudes. The European Commission has turned into a suicidal goal that it has been pursuing for years. As of today, the Russian oil imports to the EU are totally banned, and there are exemptions only for Hungary and Slovakia. According to Statistical Bureau of the EU, Eurostat, we're talking about 2-3% of oil EU imports to the European Union. At the same time, Brussels is taking steps to complicate supplies of the Russian black gold by sea to other countries. They are actively fighting against tanker fleets carrying Russian oil. All of that is being done under the slogan of the need to deprive Russia of proceeds generated from the export of energy resources. Countries that are interested in oil supplies, like Asian countries, continue to buy Russian energy sources, understanding that they are in a state of a technological race of a new stage, but yet the European Union doesn't believe that they are taking ugly actions in the interests of the countries of the global majority. Negative ramifications for the global economy and energy security are not even taken into account. Well, we'll be surprised if we would take that into account. Well, if they are harming themselves, there is no need for them to think about the countries of the world majority in Brussels, where they are actually obsessed with the desire to stop the imports of Russian gas and oil once and for all. They take into account the growing harm from such actions for the social and economic situation in the European Union, but yet they prefer to hide the situation from their own population. Thank you. We have a second question for you that stems from the first question. The EU officials who announced their plans to submit a document to permanently ban Russian oil imports, they also said that they have picked the date so that this question of the permanent oil ban wouldn't become a factor for the voting process that is taking place in Hungary, because parliamentary elections are planned in Hungary on April 12th. Well, I don't believe that such approach is normal, but I think it is great that they make such conventions. Again, it forms a basis of a body of evidence, and they have admitted that they have been destroying their own house. They have revealed their policy with regard to other countries. This is a unique confession. We're actually making a collection of such quotations. We have a list of such statements. And you know what is happening? When we publish these statements on our websites 2 or 3 months later, like phrases that represent aggressive rhetoric of Western leaders, they are angry that we are quoting them. Well, we are just making an archive. We are creating a system of these quotations and statements. I have told you about the regulation and documents of the EU to stop Russian oil exports. The European Commission, as I have told you, demonstrated their intent to present a legal ban on Russian oil imports to the European Union. Again, they are making a bet on agreeing this document by qualified majority, by circumventing interests and positions of EU member states. And that's why we value the well-balanced position of the current Hungarian leadership that, in defiance of the huge pressure that is exerted on it, continues to stay on the side of truth and common sense. It continues to pursue its own independent policy. It upholds its national interests and continues its dialogue with the Russian Federation and shows its sovereign position in our dialogue. We respect to the expression of will by the Hungarian people, and we are ready to work with any government of Hungary. I think that would be the end of my answer to a question. Thank you. Yes, thank you. Balt News, please. Hello, Ms. Zakharova. In Riga, police officers have stopped the lecture by Andrey Lankov, who is a scientist. He was deported to Estonia. They didn't like his position, and what instruments do we have to protect such citizens, and what instruments we have. Our embassy in Riga is trying to establish all the circumstances of the incident. As we have known from mass media reports, the Russian scientist Andrey Lankov was put on the blacklist, and he is no longer allowed to enter the territory of Latvia. We will comment on that later in detail later. Right now, we are gathering all the necessary information. Thank you. News.ru, please. Hello, Ms. Zakharova. You've just already told us, we have 2 questions. You've told about the British initiative to establish the headquarters of the Multinational Force for Ukraine, and you said that their forces will be a legitimate target for the Russian armed forces. But what about, but if this headquarters of 70-person headquarters will be deployed in Ukraine, will it become a legitimate target for the armed forces of Russia? I have already commented on that. It is true that London continues to deliberately speak on the topic of the foreign intervention in Ukraine by understanding that such scenario is unacceptable for Russia. They use it as a tool to undermine the peace process so that the Kiev sponsors would continue to have a war against us, according to the well-known instigations of Boris Johnson. We would like to warn them that that if they take an attempt to implement their criminal plans with the coalition of the willing, the London itself will bear the responsibility for the lives of its citizens. But it became clear to us that London doesn't care about lives of its own citizens, but we just want to warn them about it. Our position hasn't changed, it's unwavering. Any foreign contingents on Ukraine will be viewed as legitimate targets for the armed forces of the Russian Federation, and the British contingent will be no exception. And I have a second question. Since the EU failed to agree on the 20th package of sanctions due to the position of Hungary and Slovakia, due to our evaluations about how the sanctions are going to hit Europe itself, what are the possible actions that could be taken in response in economy? We understand that illegitimate and criminal sanctions and restrictions are part of the sanctions war. We have been talking about it many times. And this is a war that is being waged against our country, and no one is going to stop it. We believe that such restrictions have become a reality of a new stage of development that the world economy is experiencing at the moment. Countries of the West are not ready to recognize that their production and financial models are losing to the ones of the world majority, that their former methods of doing business are no longer generally acceptable or recognized, that countries have started to uphold their own interests. They want to trade their own resources at market value. They want to protect their economies and want to do that on the basis of international law. Russia is facing an aggressive campaign that is waged by Western countries. There is an open goal of that campaign, which is the financial and technological isolation, undermining prospects for the long-term social and economic development, inflicting maximum damage to our citizens with a focus on loosening domestic political situation. It is obvious to everyone that temporary sanctions or surgical sanctions, these are not just temporary surgical actions. This is the mechanism of systemic strategic pressure, and however the situation develops, so whatever the system of international relations exists, it is the new trend in the West to cause harm and damage to those to whom they are losing in competition. And by doing so, they take various measures by interfering in domestic affairs, in weakening economies, in imposing sanctions and restrictions. That's what they have been showing to the whole world. Despite the massive sanctions pressure, the Russian economy continues to develop, and the current challenges has stimulated the development of our industrial capabilities. It helped to expand cooperation with states that are interested in equal and mutually beneficial partnership. What's even more interesting, they wanted to inflict strategic defeat to our country, but on the contrary, they demonstrated to the whole world that by imposing sanctions, Russia withstands these sanctions. Well, they tighten up these sanctions again. They introduced new sanctions, but Russia still withstands these sanctions. So these sanctions that are being imposed in Russia, that are targeting Russia, are hitting the West itself. That's quite a unique situation in the world we're witnessing today, because those who want to harm others, and they're doing that in a massive way, in a gradual way, they are the ones who are suffering from their actions. That shows their mentality, that shows their political culture, and what is happening in their economy. I cannot even imagine what would happen with the countries that are developing these sanctions, from Estonia to Spain, from France to Portugal, from UK to Switzerland, from Sweden. Well, I forgot somebody. Well, just name some other country. Well, who else? Well, Norway. What would happen to those countries if such sanctions will be imposed on them, for example, if these sanctions will be imposed by a group of various countries of the world, could you imagine what would happen to them? Just a number of measures would be enough to block these countries. Moreover, it would be clear that circumstances of these sanctions would be difficult to overcome by these countries due to the weaknesses in their economic models. What are the reasons for that? Because for centuries, they believed that their development implied exploitation of others, and they believed that that would stay forever, and that's where they were wrong. Russian economic operators were able to launch mechanisms for cooperation with foreign partners, and they're effectively using them. And Russia has preserved its presence in external markets and effectively exploring new niches, in particular in Asia, Middle East, Latin America, and Africa. In contrast with European countries, Russia doesn't impose its political terms in exchange for economic cooperation. We offer an alternative, an open model of cooperation that is based on the respect for sovereignty, national interests of our partners, and we see that such honest and non-discriminatory attitude gains wide support of the countries of the world majority. But as for the European Union, well, no commentary is required here, because the economic growth rate of the EU is lower than the world average figure. Its competitiveness is dropping, and as for the sovereign debt, they are beating all the records, and but Washington is still the first and unbeatable. But in some EU countries, the sovereign debt has exceeded 100% of their GDP. European leaders themselves openly speak about the crisis in European industry. For example, manufacturing is reducing in chemical industry, in steel making and car industries by 10% for the past 4 years, which is not surprising. And if we remember the question of Reuters, since they place a ban on Russian oil imports, they will have to pay twice or 3 times more for the energy. And as for gas, they will have to pay 4.5 times more, because they will have to pay to the American companies. And we can see that countries of the EU that are sharing the border with Russia are suffering the most from these sanctions, and it is caused by the severance of trade ties with our country. And also, they have a growing problem of depopulation. Since 2022, the population has reduced by 10%, which indicates a serious demographic crisis being experienced by these countries.
We feel the brunt of their aggressive influence through sanctions, hybrid war, trade restrictions, and so on. It is them, not us, came up with this all, but it is them who suffer. Can you imagine that? We feel all of that too, for sure, but we respond to this clearly. But Brussels still prefer to disregard these trends, to pursue the very same course, to steal their own taxpayers. So, for only one reason, to harm Russia as much as they can. Every time we respond to this, but only considering our own national interests. Is Lenta.ru with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. We have one question. In the Western media space, with citing official, unnamed officials in the intelligence, recently there have been negotiations between U.S. and Russia and Ukraine about a treaty. Is this true? This is an example of fake information, disinformation. It's up to you to understand if it was done on purpose or that it appeared after journalists, but some particular journalists distorted the facts. But let us look into facts, confirmed facts. On the sidelines, on the conference on disarmament in Geneva, there have been a conversation between officials representing Russia and the U.S., but nothing new was discussed there. And attempts to describe this meeting that was routine diplomatic contact is not true. As to certain delegations, then it can be justified because we are talking about permanent delegations to the disarmament conference. I saw different mistakes by journalists in the media. Probably the interpretation, probably they thought that our permanent mission was a special delegation, but it was not so. It is difficult to understand what they really meant in this article. This is the real situation. As to the U.S.-China contacts, I'd recommend you asking Washington and Beijing. Thank you. Is Ukraine.ru with us? Madam Zakharova, good afternoon. Thank you very much for giving a lot of attention to the Ukrainian issue. We have two questions today. Russia demanded the release of Nicolás Maduro from the U.S. What can be our further steps if it does not happen? We follow closely the situation around the so-called court and trial in the U.S. about legitimate and legally elected president of Venezuela, Nicolás Maduro, and his wife. We support their immediate release. We will comment on as more information come our way. Question 2. The Service of External Intelligence of Russia said that France and Great Britain plan to give nuclear weapons to Ukraine. What can you say about this? We don't need something that does not belong to us, so we leave provocations to France and Great Britain. It is their prerogative. We have shared our evaluations that follow up to the information of the Service of Foreign Intelligence. I doubt that the French embassy knew about that. I don't think that they were privy to this kind of information. Those plans were developed secretly. Otherwise, this was publicly accessible information. But all manipulations about nuclear weapons, nuclear materials, and energy were a commonplace among Western countries. They used NPPs as a tool of blackmail and threats. They endlessly talked that Ukraine needed nuclear weapons and about their possible targets. All of that happened, and it is true. But what to do with all of their real plans were secret. But our special services unveiled this. The detailed can be found on our website. It contained not only legitimate and unacceptable, but simply crazy plans of France and Great Britain. They are fraught with escalation of the Ukrainian conflict and undermining of a non-proliferation regime and total collapse on the European continent first and foremost. I would like to say to the Embassy of France in Moscow, when we talked about biological experiments that taken place on the CIS space under the auspices of European curators, we heard this very thing, that it was lies. Ultimately, Victoria Nuland had to recognize when American legislators asked her, she said, indeed, biolaboratories were in Ukraine. They were hidden because they operated under the auspices of the Ukrainian Health Ministry, but they worked not only because, but under permanent control and management of Pentagon. No one believed it back then. So I would like to ask the French embassy to follow the agenda. Thank you. Is News Front with us? Yes, Madam Zakharova, we are here. If I may, we have two questions. We had three, but one of them was already answered. On February 24th, in the day of the 4th anniversary of the special military operation, the German capital opened a museum of the conflicts in Ukraine. The exposition included cans with energy drinks with Nazi slogans and were presented at the basement of the former Nazi bomb shelter Berlin Story bunker with the words at the entrance, Helfen oder Eschot sein, to help or to be an asshole. The ticket is 18 euros. In your opinion, is it a sacrilegious show with propaganda elements or a claim to support Nazi ideas? How can you comment on this? This is one of the quickest and most effective tests to check whether a person is sane and whether they are committed to morality or anti-morality, fascism, Nazism, and so on. This is a private initiative of a person who probably should be described as a German Russophobe and a Nazi. In February 2023, in Berlin, through his efforts at the embassy of the Russian embassy, a cheap provocation was organized. It was a demonstration of a Russian tank blown up. They thought that they came up with a very creative thing. Afterwards, they had an exhibition of blown up Leopards, if I'm not tanks, if I'm not mistaken, and there were many tanks, not just one. Do you remember that? It was his art endeavor, if I may say so. We are shocked how these people attempt to impose their narrative about the Russian aggression against, and they say, the peaceful population of Ukraine. They do it on purpose. They lie to the public about what is going on in Ukraine. They try to distract people from the terror attacks of the regime about black transplantology, corruption, spillover of weapons. If I return to your initial question, according to the information by the organizers of this act, which is an example of anti-Russian lies, it was supported and inspired by the Defense Ministry of Ukrainian National Military and Historic Museum in Kiev. The German authorities openly acquiesced that. And it's not up to us. We shared our opinion about that. It's up to the German people what they encourage and what disease they not only see progressing but even fuel. It has already led them to the precipice once. And in 1930s, it spread very quickly. Now, information speeds are much, much faster. And the scale is much bigger. We see that such acts are commonplace in Germany. Germany put an end to the Third Reich, supposedly. It had to get rid of this brown plague. But probably it is yet to be seen. But it is not a rhetoric question. Thank you very much. And one more question, if I may. Yes, please. Go on. It is a question to follow up from the Ukraine.ru. What about the debunking the news about giving nuclear weapons to Ukraine? What was there in this debunking? It confirms yet again the destructive role of the EU in the European crisis. It shows the inability to negotiate of the current European authorities. The so-called European elite are not only not prepared to talk about the causes and the possible solutions to the crisis, they want the opposite. They want to protract and escalate the crisis. We talk about it constantly, even today. Europe has abandoned diplomacy as a profession, as specialization. You see, any negotiation process, and diplomacy is not possible without it, means clear aspiration to find compromises. We have no doubt that given what is done and said by the current leadership of the EU, there is no aspiration to find a compromise there. They also don't have a realistic approach to the situation. The understanding of what is going on the ground. Besides, we see crazy willingness to influence destructively all the processes that one way or another can lead to the settlement. it feels as if they are inspired. When new negotiations or discussions start, they want to block them immediately under any pretense. What I would like to add, this ideological approach, all of this prevents the EU to contribute to the settlement in Ukraine and to the situation on the continent in general. We are still open to an honest, direct dialogue with all sensible partners. Thank you. Is Al-Maidin with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. We are here. We see growing tensions both around Ukraine and Iran and Cuba as well. What can you say about the possible interconnectedness of these processes? Is there any common scenario? I absolutely agree with you. Both the Ukrainian conflict, the situations around Venezuela, Iran, Cuba are the chains of are parts of one chain. They are signs of the continued degradation of international situation, but this is provoked by the Western countries. They want to retain dominance in the international arena that they are losing. They act aggressively. They don't look up the words in the diplomatic dictionary, especially it concerns the USA, that basically abandoned the international law and bring to life the colonial behavior of the 19th century. They don't even hide that. If they attempted not to attract too much attention to that, now they are open about it. Thank you. Thanks to you. Is Anadolu with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. Good afternoon. I'm here with you. We have a question about the UNGA resolution that was endorsed a couple of days ago. It calls on unconditional and immediate ceasefire in Ukraine. What does Moscow think about this resolution and this call, and the fact that the US abstained from voting on the resolution?
You have probably seen that our position has been presented in great detail on the website of the Russian Foreign Ministry. Please do not exaggerate the resolution that was adopted by the 11th Emergency Special Session of the UN General Assembly, because we believe that it is a follow-up to a series of anti-Russian documents and endeavors that have been adopted by this special session. We have never recognized the need to convene such a session of the UN General Assembly, because if we are talking about peace, if we are advocating for peace, and if we are talking about peace, and if we call for peace, then it is obvious what measures should be taken. Negotiating process, calls to settlement, the refusal of encouraging terrorist acts by the Kiev regime, condemnation of these acts, and discussion at the relevant venues of international organizations that are working on counterterrorism. This endless supplies of everything, of every types of weapons to support the Kiev regime. These are the special steps that could be taken, but they meet once again and they are engaging in this Russophobic demagogy, it won't help to achieve peace, because they are doing quite the contrary by supplying weapons to Kiev and by making statements about there is no peace without the victory of the Kiev regime, or no, that peace is impossible without Ukraine's terms, or that Europeans should sit at the negotiating table. That's what they are calling for. We believe that the UN Security Council plays a key role and bears a special responsibility for the maintenance of international law and security. It adopted a year ago a resolution 2774, which calls to the peaceful settlement of the conflict in Ukraine. And I recall that this document is legally binding and it calls to the peaceful settlement of the conflict in Ukraine. And today it is the objective of all interested countries to consistently implement this decision of the UN Security Council in good faith. And as for the new resolution of the UN General Assembly, like the preceding non-consensus decisions of this body on the issue of Ukraine, it has nothing to do with humanism, with the careful attitude towards the fate of regular citizens and remedy of justice. The only objective that the authors of the document had is to try and to create obstacles as the real negotiating process took place in a trilateral format. Since they are unable to negotiate, their call to reach ceasefire is just another deception in order to give a pause to the armed forces of Ukraine, to buy time or to redeploy themselves. Well, a reasonable part of the international community perfectly understands it, because they were deceived in a similar way earlier. And it is noteworthy that the US delegation that stands as a mediator in trilateral negotiating process tried to amend this politicized and lopsided document co-sponsored by Ukraine and Europeans. They offered to remove a number of controversial paragraphs, including confirmation of the territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. Well, when they failed to do so, Americans refused to support the initial draft document during the vote, and it is certain that a more clearer signal would be if the United States voted against the document. But yet, in the current situation, it is clear that there is a huge divide in the Western Bloc on the issue of Ukraine, and this divide is deepening. The European warmongers are afraid of achieving peace in Ukraine because and they are afraid of it, and they are trying to abstract pragmatic diplomatic efforts, but all their efforts are doomed to fail. And we'll just say that they won't achieve their goals. Then that's my answer to your question. Yes, thank you. Dunya News, please.
I'm Shaktimal.
Hello.
Correspondent, Dunya News, Pakistan. I have one question today. How does the Russian side assess the upcoming visit of Prime Minister of Pakistan, Mian Mohammad Shehbaz Sharif, to Moscow in the context of bilateral relations? Can we expect any concrete agreements or tangible progress in the areas of energy, industrial cooperation, and trade during this visit?
As you know, I would like to say that we have a well-established practice, information about such events when it comes to summit-level meetings, high-level meetings. Such events are announced by the presidential office, executive office, so we need to wait information from them. And on our part, in the context of Pakistan and our bilateral ties, I can announce that tomorrow, on February 27th, at the International Multimedia Press Center of Россия Сегодня Media Group, Media Forum Moscow Islamabad will be opened, which it coincides with the visit of the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Shehbaz Sharif, to Moscow on March 3rd and 5th, 2026. And at this forum, Russian and Pakistani journalists, political scientists, and representatives of diplomatic corps will discuss the modern status and prospects for development of bilateral relations, as the role of Russia and Pakistan partnership and political, economic, and information processes that are happening place in the modern world. And this event is important to get information, first-hand information to learn more about each other. That's not just a media forum. That will be an online digital forum between Moscow and Islamabad. You will find all the information on the website and will be available to Russian and Pakistani media holdings. So we invite you to visit the media forum. We will speak a lot about bilateral relations. And as for you, I'm going to send you information about Russia-Pakistan relations in various fields that you mentioned in your question. Thank you. Greater Asia, please. Hello, Ms. Zakharova. Greater Asia. We have two questions for you. The 9th meeting of the Labour Party of Korea has officially re-elected Kim Jong-un to the position of the General Secretary. The composition of the Central Committee of the party was significantly changed. And apart from that, the materials of that meeting noted the start of the new era in the DPRK. Taking into account these events, what could be the first development of bilateral relations in the eyes of the Russian Foreign Ministry. The 9th meeting of the Labour Party of Korea is a crucial event for the DPRK. The chairman of the All Russia Political Party, United Russia, and deputy chairman of the Russian Security Council, Dmitry Medvedev, has sent a congratulatory letter to Kim Jong-un, who was re-elected to the position of the General Secretary of the Labour Party of Korea. Mr. Medvedev emphasized the high political authority and merits of the Korean leader in the development of the DPRK and strengthening sovereignty and fighting capacity. We're truly happy about the achievements that our Korean friends made in their path, and we wish every success to them. And as for our bilateral cooperation, we are convinced that it will continue to develop successfully in line with the letter and spirit of the Treaty on Comprehensive Strategic Partnership that was signed by Russian and North Korean leaders during the historical summit in Pyongyang on June 19, 2024. This treaty demonstrates traditionally friendly, good neighborly Russia-North Korea relations that have reached a qualitatively new level of alliance, which is in line with all requirements of our modernity. Second question is, the Council of the Eurasian Economic Commission has approved the launch of procedures to sign the agreement on fighting legal content in Internet. Do you believe that it will reflect the media cooperation between EU countries and media at large? This agreement was adopted by the Council of the Eurasian Economic Commission on February 24th, and it seeks to strengthen coordination between EU member states in the protection of owners of content who have intellectual property rights to that content from its unauthorized use by third persons. This document provides a whole range of measures by the EU member states to restrict access to this information resources, which where items of intellectual property are being used in a legal way. In particular, owners of information resources should restrict access to the materials posted on their websites. Falsified information will be blocked by the regulators of EU countries. Our country consistently advocated for the prohibition of using such content in a legal way, and we have been fighting against illegal content. That's why such decision is a positive message for mass media and EU countries. We believe that cooperation between EU countries will benefit from this document and from its implementation. Such agreements and arrangements exist at a global level. For example, on October 25th, 2025, Hanoi has witnessed the ratification, the signing ceremony of the UN Convention Against Cybercrime, which was developed at the initiative of the Russian Federation. This is a universal law enforcement instrument that, apart from other things, contains provisions on countering the spread of illegal information in the Internet, Article 12, and distribution of child pornography, Article 4. It is an important document strengthening fundamentals of international cooperation. We hope that all EU partners will join this document as well. Thank you. Voice of the Fatherland, please. Hello, Ms. Zakharova. Voice of the Fatherland. We have a question for you. Dmitry Medvedev claimed that Russia has become absolutely independent in providing equipment for the special military operation, but yet the head of the European diplomacy, Kaja Kallas, circulated a document with the request to downsize Russian troops and ensure Russian democratization. In the opinion of the Russian Foreign Ministry, could such requests be qualified as an attempt to restrict the military sovereignty of Russia, and how the agency is going to counter such attempts? You know, when a crime is committed and a verdict is passed by court and criminals are sent to prison, there are people who commit a crime, investigation is being launched, a verdict is passed, but criminals are sent to asylum for mentally ill people because these persons have some mental conditions, they have some mania and other problems with their mental health. Yes, they committed a crime, but they need treatment because they are not sane. What they've done is absolutely criminal. But on the other hand, it seems that we are dealing with a community of crazy men. You're asking me a question which sounds like a simple question which has an obvious answer. Yes, it is true. We view such a statement by Kaja Kallas as unacceptable and inadmissible. But then we admit ourselves that for us such statements sound as if these are legal statements, they're in a legal field, and we view such person as a sane person, but at the same time, this person goes beyond its powers vested on her. But what can we say about Kaja Kallas, who is saying such ridiculous things? Which her statements have nothing to do with worldview, and they have nothing to do with the reality. I remember when we were seriously and jokingly offering them to look at the map, but now it seems that it has no point to say them to look at the map. Annalena Baerbock, as the former foreign minister of Germany, had a map of the European Union. She was a foreign minister of one of the largest EU countries. And when she was the foreign minister of Germany, she failed to understand that Greenland is not part of the European Union. There is no point to offer them to look at the map. I would offer Kaja Kallas to look at the map of the Russian Federation, and ask her how can she call Russia to downsize its troops on the Russian territory, not on the territory of Estonia or other states, but to downsize Russian troops on the Russian territory. She could probably look at the size of our country and at the length of borders which Russia shares with European countries. Or what about Asian countries? They have no such allusions or requests to our country. Your question sounds quite interesting. It is true that Kaja Kallas has made absurd requests to Russia, and I should add that it wouldn't lead to any constructive tendencies. Well, they are trying to present all of that as part of the situation in Ukraine, but it won't help to achieve peace, because I don't understand how it's going to help to achieve peace, taking into account all these ridiculous things she's talking about all the time. All these statements demonstrate the attitude of Brussels to not end the conflict in Ukraine. This is their criminal philosophy. At the same time, we are talking about their insane understanding of the reality. They are completely torn from the reality. The European Union is undermining all the agreements and puts forward various initiatives that aim to torpedo all our diplomatic efforts to end the conflict in Ukraine. And now they are making these manipulations that Paris and London were responsible for in the context of nuclear weapons.
This involves intrigues with the Kiev regime. Brussels doesn't hide that the end of the conflict on conditions acceptable for Moscow does not reflect European values or interests. Whose interests? Who asked the Europeans about their interests? It is not mentioned. They hype up the myth about aspirations of Russia to conquer Europe if the conflict in Ukraine is over. Can this be called a failure, a position that will lead to failure? Well, probably yes, but it more resembles an extremist policy. This leads Europe on a dangerous path to escalate the conflict or even to escalate the situation on the continent. We'll continue our consistent work at international platforms to defend Russia's right for equal and indivisible security, to counter all challenges that we see. They don't hide them anymore, in my opinion. Well, thank you very much. Thanks to you. Thank you. Is the newsletter of the Caucasus with us? Yes, good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. Good afternoon. Vladimir Putin appointed Sergey Vershinin as the new ambassador of Russia to Turkey. What goals are set for him as a representative of Russia in Ankara? I would divide your question into two parts, two tracks. First, any newly appointed ambassador of the Russian Federation, and the decision is made by the president to appoint an ambassador, they are charged to represent Russia and to implement Russia's foreign policy on this track, to facilitate our citizens abroad. They have a lot of goals. They are described in our documents, starting from the concept of foreign policy and to their duties. The second track is bilateral relations. For Russia, Turkey remains one of the key foreign partners. We have serious trade and economic relations. In energy, they reached a strategic level. We develop intensive political dialogue, settle a number of serious regional problems. These factors define the set of issues that the Russian diplomatic mission in Ankara is dealt with. One of the tracks of the ambassador's work is defending Russian interest on the Turkish track, including mutual beneficial cooperation with Turkey in trade and in industry, expansion of contacts between the people, support and defense of rights of our compatriots there. We are sure that these goals will be reached effectively and professionally, because we know the personal contribution of Sergey Vershinin to Russian foreign policy. Thank you. Are there any more questions? I haven't responded yet. In this case, I say goodbye until the next time. Thank you for your attention. We are always open to you. I wish you all the best.